Hello everyone, my name is Phreak, and this is my patch 7.17 rundown for League of Legends. If you don't know who I am a commentator for the North American LCS, which is the North American Professional League of Legends League. I'm also a diamond level player, so hopefully you trust me. If you don't, that's fine. There's other really smart people who make these videos as well. If you just YouTube search it, you'll find them. So 7.17 is a very small patch. It also doesn't mean much for the grand scheme of League of Legends. 7.16 is the patch for the North American and European playoffs, as well as regional qualifiers. 7.15 appears to be the patch for South Korea. 16 appears to be the patch for China, and I don't know the rest off the top of my head. But almost no regions change patches during during a playoff run, for example. Anyway, 7.17 is basically a nothing patch, and the balance team basically are going to be waiting to see what the impact of the 7.16 changes were, and even some of the 7.17 stuff, the stuff that's even here, and one last iteration before 7.18. We're kind of at the dead spot before Worlds. Worlds will be on 7.18 to my knowledge, and that's going to be the same patch for the entire run. Anyway, let's get into 7.17 such as it is. Up first, Ornn is coming out. Ornn is supposed to be a top lane offensive tank. Think something like Sion or Leona or Malphite, where they go in and start fights. That's Ornn's goal. His abilities are really cool. He can make items while still in lane and just use them immediately, as long as they're not potions, and it allows your teammates to buy an upgraded version of an item like a Trinity Force or Rabadon's Death Cap or a Black Cleaver to gain some extra power as well. Overall, seems really cool. He will not be allowed for Worlds, by the way, so for those looking for that, Ornn will not be allowed for the World Championship. Anyway, he looks really cool. He's a top laner, maybe a support. You should probably max W first in all these cases. It's good wave clear. It has a guaranteed minimum damage against minions, and overall, it's pretty cool. All right, looks like a cool bro. We're gonna move on now. Draven getting some nerfs, basically. If you can kill him, he gets less gold. I mean, Draven is definitely a bit too strong in solo queue. It doesn't really get to see much play in professional, which is a little weird to me because pros seem to really like lane dominance in the bot lane, which is why they're playing so much Varus and Caitlyn, even after all the nerfs to Caitlyn. So it would stand to reason that Draven would be seen, but we don't see him almost at all. His wave clear sucks, to be fair. Like, there's other things wrong, but he's definitely too strong in solo queue, so... the basic nerf is just that he snowballs less well. I mean, the 25 less gold on kill is just, 25 less gold per kill always. And then the actual adoration stacks lost on death is something else. I mean, I think this is going to be like a 1 to a 0.5% win rate change. I think Draven is still going to be on the strong side. I hesitate to say too strong, but he is on the strong side, and he will, in my opinion, remain that way. I think these nerfs are very small. So it doesn't mean that much. First interesting change of the patch is Ezreal getting a pretty large attack damage ratio buff to his Q. Worth noting, this is total attack damage, meaning his base stats also factor in, which makes this a bigger buff than you would initially think. Excuse me. And I wanted to point out the actual numbers on this. So here is the chart. Now the left-hand columns are no runes and masteries. The right-hand columns are also no runes and masteries, but including a Trinity Force, both for the attack damage the item gives, as well as the on-hit double base AD effect right there. And you can see it's a lot of the number 3. It's a 3 to 5% damage increase in all the lesser cases. Now it's worth noting, the more attack damage Ezreal buys, the bigger this buff is, because the actual change is about a 10% increase in the total attack damage ratio. So the more attack damage you have, the closer to a 10% damage amp this actually is. Of course, things have a base damage. Trinity Force is a base damage, essentially. So that 10% number is deflated in the lowest of all possible scenarios. But this buff is actually greater than this in any real-world scenarios where you're actually getting attack damage, and maybe you get an Infernal Drake in there or something. You've got your other situations going on. So, pretty reasonable buff. I think this will add him... this will add 1, maybe 2% win rate to the champion. There's actually one other change that's in the bug fixes that will help him as well. That we'll go over when we get to the bug fix section. It's a small buff, but it'll help him. Anyway, this is somewhat meaningful. I think this means that Ezreal will be seen in pro play a bit more than he is now. He's already a fringe pick, but I think he'll be I think he'll be comfortably in top 6 if nothing else happens to bot laners. I think he's still going to be on the weak side for solo queue. I think he's sitting at like 45 or 46% right now, which is quite low for solo queue. That said, Ezreal's kind of, I think for the last several years, has been a sub 50% win rate solo queue pick while still being pro viable. And that's just the case because Ezreal's hard to play. You can have champions like this that have low win rates that are actually fine as long as you're good at the champion. Azir is another example of this, and Ryze is an example of this as well. And such as it is, this is where Ezreal sits. Anyway, this will help. Hecarim with an interesting set of changes. I think it's good design, but will actually further skew his pro versus solo queue viability. So the first thing is just a nice, cute quality of life change. It's generally correct to cast your E, start charging, and then ult to your opponent. Once they're done being feared, then you slam them with the E knockback to add further crowd control. And so now your E is less likely to time out because it'll pause the duration during the ulti. Great, those are all fun things. But here's the thing it's going to buff him in solo queue and nerf him in pro play, even though I think it's good design. Generally speaking, I like that risk and reward are correlated, so that you don't have low risk, high reward and high risk, low reward, because those are dumb. And so if you go for the point blank ultimate, you now get less fear duration because there's no risk. It's a point blank shot, it can't miss. Whereas the max duration and the max distance is actually another ½ second long of fear, which is really, really big for potential area of effect fear. Now the difficulty with this is pros can dodge this. And in solo queue, where players are less good and also have lag, are less likely to. So this 1.5 second fear is going to happen a lot in solo queue, and it's much less likely to happen in pro play, which again is that exacerbated good in solo queue, bad in pro, even though I think it's good design. So such as it is, Hecarim probably gains in solo queue and probably still never sees any pro play. Leona gets some very, very, very large buffs. I think she probably gains 2% win rate or more with this. We're going to start with the Shield of Daybreak change because it's easier to look at. This is just a straight buff. Unless you're going to hit level 18, that's basically just better. Now, maxing Q versus E second was debatable. You could theoretically make a case for maxing Shield of Daybreak and getting that 5-second cooldown. I think it was reasonable. I thought both approaches were viable. But now you're clearly going to max it last, and that means you're going to get to max the E second in all cases. So your windows to start engaging are more open to you. And you've still got a very, very respectable short Q cooldown for your gameplay. So this in itself helps Leona quite a bit. And then this is a buff to the damage that Sunlight deals by about 30-35%. And the mark duration, of course, is halved. So here's the numbers on the buff in terms of the damage. You can see it's 25% at level 1. You know, if you're going to land that 1 Q and then start trading with it, and then it's up to almost 40% by endgame. I believe this has an AP ratio, but it doesn't matter because Leona doesn't buy AP, so who cares about this? But hey, the damage is higher, and that's quite nice. End of the day, your trade's going to be more damaging, to the order of, you know, 15 damage by mid-game, but it's 15 damage every single spell if your teammates can trigger. Now, there are going to be cases where the mark duration nerf is going to matter. I would say in a lot of cases it won't. Pretty frequently, people are going to be able to trigger this, but there are going to be times this is not a straight buff in all cases. I still think this is a net buff for Leona by a pretty large margin. Anyway, yeah, I think this is pretty cool. Quick numbers on the passive change. You can see these right here. Again, very obviously it's a substantial buff, and no one's going to be doing anything but maxing it last. And so you kind of get to max E second for free as a result of these changes, and still get some reward here. So it's very hard to construe this as anything but a buff. I think you're a little bit outlandish if you try to skew this another way. Yeah, 2% win rate to Leona, maybe 1.5. Pretty good though. Maokai, I think, does deserve nerfs. Sadly, he's not getting them this patch. 7.17, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, seems to be a wait and see patch. I definitely didn't think the 7.16 changes were going to be enough to get him out of being a top tier pro pick or being a above 50% solo queue pick. That's still true. And so I think 7.18 should have more small Maokai nerfs. I don't think he needs much more. I think he's definitely very strong. And what's interesting, he's actually a very good counter pick into Gnar, which you'd think would be surprising, but he's actually good into Gnar, even though Gnar's supposed to be an anti-tank. So difficulties and such. But anyway, Maokai's a a strong bro. And this, technically it nerfs him. Can't sap off of wards, but it really means nothing. Nice follow-up on Urgot changes, and this is something that the designers almost always try to do, which is come in with several patches of suites of changes, just realizing more things that should have changed, or just they didn't have enough time when the champion came out and they were design locked. But first one is just keeping your lock-on debuff, keeping the duration up for the W. That's great. The only use of lock-on is for the W, so that's just useful. You're going to make sure you can actually shoot the champion, which is good. Disdain locks out Purge while it's being cast, and Purge, by the way, is the autocannon, like shoot wildly around you. Well, shoot at one thing around you, but in any direction. Thing is, just Purge shoots basically 3 times a second. So even though this looks like, oh my gosh, wow, what a big change, 1 3/8 becomes 1 second, it's 1 attack. And they're low power attacks, so it's not the sickest, most insane buff. I mean, it is a buff straight up. Like this is in all cases a buff, just like the Purge change is in all cases a buff. It's just kind of small. And I don't think Urgot is terribly weak. I think people are still bad at playing him. I don't think we'll see him in pro unless he gets even more buffs, but he's kind of a cool bro, and this helps him a little bit. And this is, of course, a buff in all situations as well, just giving him more of a window to actually use the R. And you notice that kind of all these feel like, even though they are all buffs in all cases, right, they are buffs that are very clearly targeted at weaknesses that the designers found. That are like, hey, I think he needs this, I think he needs this, this part feels bad, etc. So cool. Urgot, I think, is still generically weak in solo queue, but I think if you're good at him, he's just fine. Buffs to Zed, he's getting basically 1% extra base attack speed, and he's getting an extra 10th on the duration of Living Shadow. As far as the actual math of the attack speed, again, it's 1.1%. And what's funny about bonus attack speed on an assassin is it's almost a bursty stat, which sounds weird, but let me explain. You cannot do 1% more auto attack damage with attack speed. That there's going to be no worlds where Zed autos 100 times. There aren't. That's just not going to be the case. Even if he's killing a Stoneplate Zed or a Stoneplate Cho'Gath, what if he's going to die first? What this really means is 1 out of 100 times, he gets an extra auto attack off. He's split pushing for a turret, and, he would have gotten 4 or 5 autos off, and just barely gets that 5th auto this time around before getting ganked. Goes for the all-in with Death Mark and just gets that last auto attack off, 1 out of 100 times. That's what's happening here, basically, right? Is 1 out of 100 times you're getting an extra auto attack. Ish, or it's not always 1 out of 100, but, something like this. So sometimes he gets an extra auto. That can help with split pushing. It can help his all-ins. Living Shadow, I've seen some Reddit comments talk about how it can allow him to get an extra spell off during the duration of the Shadow, which is quite nice for his early landing phase when he doesn't have a lot of CDR. Later on, when he does have CDR, he can easily cast 2 spells off, but this is more likely to be pretty reasonable for him. Overall, these are small Zed buffs. I mean, you can't consider them as anything but Zed buffs. I think he's slightly on the weak side, but not by too much. We see very sparse pro play from him. It's interesting because I think assassins will tend to be sub 50% win rate champions in solo queue generically, because assassins kind of by nature are going to be a bit situational, and it stands to reason that people are going to pick them in bad situations. They have a Tahm Kench, better pick Zed. Happens. Their mage already wants to buy Zhonya's first item. Let's pick Zed. Weird. So those situations can exist. And so I don't think Zed should ever be 50% solo queue, just as a design like that. I think that it should never happen. But this should help a little bit. I don't think he's terribly weak, but hey, he gets some love. They're pretty small nerfs though, or sorry, it's pretty small buffs. I don't expect this to move the needle much. One other change. Ardent Censer getting some nerfs / changes. The attack speed and health drain is now flattened at a pretty early mark. Goes from 20 to 35 to just 25 flat. Here's the math on Ardent Censer, by the way. It's worth pointing out, it wasn't actually 20 to 35. It was 20.8 to 35 because the per level actually counted at level 1. It means the break-even point on Ardent Censer is level 6, which is the earliest you would reasonably buy an Ardent Censer anyway. Like, yes, it's possible that, your Sona or Nami or whatever buys it at 5, but by and large, this is not going to happen. So worth really thinking about this chart. The first 4 levels are basically impossible, and supports don't really level past 14 in most cases, so you're going to look towards the middle a bit more, and you're getting, hey, a 10 to 15%, drop in effectiveness. Of course, the base item itself still gives you healing and shielding power, it still gives you cooldown reduction, it still gives you ability power and move speed, and all those things aren't changing, but as far as this is concerned, it's generally speaking going down in value, down in efficiency. I think if you're going to buy the item first on a Nami, you're still going to do it. Just the late game 10% extra attack speed or 5% extra attack speed or whatever is going to be a little bit meaningful. So yes, this will definitely drop the win rates of these champions a little bit because hey, the item was definitely super strong and it's slightly weaker now. I don't think it's going to have any giant metagame implications, but hey, it's a thing. Gargoyle Stoneplate, getting a bug fix where basically if you were a Cinderhulk user, it gave you too much health. The math is here if you really want to look at it, but basically this is another small dig at Cinderhulk junglers. What's interesting is I'm going to tell a story of Lee Sin. He's not a Stoneplate user, generally, he can be, but I'm going to tell you a story of Lee Sin. Lee Sin got nerfed in 7.10, and from 7.9 to 7.10, Lee Sin's pick rate went from like, I'm going to forget the numbers, but went from, in pro play, his pick ban rate went from like 75% to 55%, right? So still seeing a lot of games, didn't change that much about him. 55%, something like this. And then in I want to say 13, was the Cinderhulk patch. And the Cinderhulk patch made him go from that mid-50s pick rate and ban rate to the mid-30s in pick and ban rate. And every patch after that, up until present day, it went down and down and down. And there were no direct changes in any way to Lee Sin. But he went from Cinderhulk was released, 35% pick and ban rate, down and down and down until present day in pro. For the last 3 patches straight, roughly, well, not 3 patches, but, for the last little while, he's been a 5% pick rate. It was like, 35, 25, 15, like 8, 7, 5. And so now Lee Sin is a 5% presence jungler in pro play. Now what's funny is, again, Lee Sin got nerfed, and then Cinderhulk came out, and then nothing changed and it kept gradually declining. And there was a 7 times presence, right? 5% is present day, 35% was the Cinderhulk patch when it got its first big buffs. So there was a 7 times pick rate difference between now, where players have figured out the right junglers, and back when Cinderhulk came out, when they were still playing Lee Sin in 1/3 of all games, instead of being in 1/20th of all games, right? Those are very large differences, despite, again, nothing happening to Lee Sin. What this means is that pros are, naturally a bit slow to adapt because they need to figure out what the changes are. Now, considering that Cinderhulk got nerfed in 7.16, and Stoneplate is getting nerfed for junglers in 7.17, the real, pick rate of tank junglers is somewhere, and it is not where it is right now. Right? There have been nerfs that the pros have not properly calibrated for, just like they did not properly calibrate their Lee Sin pick rate for Cinderhulk existing in the world, and figuring out that they should be playing Maokai and Cho'Gath and all these other champions and Gragas and everything else. So there will be some level of learning process here where you'll see a pick rate of champions, and it won't be correct in terms of what's actually good or what's actually best. Now, maybe Lee Sin deserves to get some buffs or something. I don't know what to tell you, but I wanted to sort of talk about Stoneplate and jungle pick rates and things like that. I'm curious to see what Zach's pick rate is going to be over the course of time, because maybe he gets more nerfs coming in the near future, but he's sub 50% in solo queue, still gets banned a fair bit, and I haven't seen him be that insane in pro play. So anyway, let's move on. There are more gameplay changes at the very bottom of the patch notes, but we're going to go over the other things as well. Preferred item slots, you can now, when you make an item set, which I recommend you make, and by the way, I have a YouTube video on this channel about making custom item sets. Really think you should do them. It'll help you play the game a little bit better. But custom item sets, you can now set an item slot. So your Zhonya's is always on 2, your health potions are always on 3, your boots of speed are always on 6, etc. It will not move an active item already in your inventory, so you don't accidentally use a potion when you mean to use Zhonya's, when you buy something else randomly. But this is cool. I don't think it's going to get almost any use. I'm a little bit surprised this is actually made, because I feel like item sets are rarely used, and though this is cool, and I think a good thing for the game, almost no one's going to use this feature, so I'm just a little surprised it got made at all. But still, cool. And I'll probably put this in myself so my boots are always in the bottom, etc. If you got honored and you exited the lobby, you can now see it. That's kind of cute. Blood Moon's going to be on for a few days, next couple of weekends. Pretty fun game mode. It's the assassin game mode. You kill each other and you get points, and then you try to win the game with those. Star Guardian skins coming out also look pretty cool. Excited for these. Invasion game mode I'm actually really excited for. I have not seen almost any of the videos or screenshots of this. I am hyped to play it. What's also cool is you get to play in the Star Guardian skins for free, even if you don't own them, which is really sweet as well. And it's going to be on for 2.5 weeks starting in early September. Excited about that, definitely. Match history now shows normal games, or at least will very soon. Let's talk about bug fixes, because there are a couple that actually mattered here. This means almost nothing. He had Thorin's shield plus 2 potions. Okay, whatever. Doesn't affect the gameplay in any way. This is the buff that affects Ezreal, though. Muramana now correctly refunds mana spent. This is actually pretty meaningful, because keep in mind, Muramana deals damage to champions when you attack them based on how much mana you have. So even though you have a theoretically infinite mana pool, or practically infinite mana pool because of how much mana you have with a Muramana, the fact that you're actually getting the mana back means this directly translates into damage. And considering that Ezreal is one of the only Muramana users left in League of Legends, this is pretty much a direct Ezreal buff. So both his Q buffs and these Muramana bug fixes are going to lift Ezreal up a little bit. Almost definitely still sub 50 in solo queue, but a bit more viable. And I think, again, we see him in pro play a little bit. The only other interaction that matters is Blade of the Ruined King no longer gives you a second stack when you auto attack while wielding a black cleaver. This is mostly a Lucian nerf. I don't think it destroys Lucian. I think he's still fine. It does nerf him, though, to be completely fair. Armor shred is good no matter what. Even if you're not hitting tanks, you can still reduce our armor by 3 per stack and do more damage. It matters. It does affect him. Doesn't affect his lane bullying. He buys the item second, so this is like 25 minutes on. I've seen some Nars will build this. I've even seen Renekton build this. So there are some sort of fighter anti-tank builds that really wanted their Black Cleaver stack super early, and they don't get it anymore. For what it's worth, this is consistent with things like Jarvan passive, where it doesn't give you double stacks either. All kind of intended behaviors here. And again, yes, it slightly nerfs these champions, but not meaningfully such that you're going to change your champion pools or anything else. The rest of these are all very, very small, so I'm not going to read through them. If you want to, you can do that yourself. New Sivir, well, not new, but a reskinned Sivir skin. I guess it's the Pack Sivir Chroma or something. It's cool. I have this skin, so I'm really excited to use it. I really like playing Sivir. Should be exciting. It's a very small patch, of course. If you want to catch the charts, the Imager album will be linked in the description below. And yeah, basically we're all going to be waiting until 7.18 and Worlds is going to start, which should be a larger but also sort of subtle patch, much like 7.16 was. It'll be fun to watch, and I will catch you all next time.